Autumn of 1887 brings relentless rain to the Montana Territory, turning dirt roads into treacherous mud rivers and crushing spirits already worn thin by hardship. When widowed rancher Jackson Blackwood rides into the squalid mining town of Bitter Creek, he expects nothing more than to sell his cattle, purchase winter supplies, and return to his empty homestead where memories of his departed wife and son still haunt every corner. But fate has darker plans waiting behind the grimy windows of the Rusty Nail Saloon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rainwater cascades off Jackson's wide-brimmed hat as he dismounts from his mud-spattered horse. 5 days of hard riding through the autumn downpour has left him bone-weary, his usually imposing 6'3" frame slightly stooped with exhaustion. At 42, the years of ranching have etched deep lines around his eyes and threaded silver through his dark beard. The locals call him the Ghost Rider, not just for his tendency to appear without warning during trading seasons, but for the hollow look that's haunted his gaze since losing his family 3 years prior. "You picked a miserable night to come to an even more miserable town," calls the livery stable owner, a hunchbacked man named Ezra who takes the reins of Jackson's stallion. "Cattle sales still happening tomorrow?" Jackson nods, his voice rough. "From disuse. Need somewhere dry tonight. The hotel still standing?" Ezra's laugh turns into a phlegmy cough. "Standing's a generous word for it. But it's got a roof that leaks in only 5 places instead of 10. He gestures toward the sagging 2-story building across the muddy street. "Though you might want to steer clear tonight. Wainwright's hosting one of his special auctions at the Rusty Nail." Jackson's jaw tightens at the mention of Luther Wainwright, the self-appointed Baron of Bitter Creek, a man who'd built his fortune by exploiting the desperate, providing loans to struggling miners and farmers, then collecting everything they owned when they inevitably couldn't repay. "What's he selling this time?" Jackson asks, though part of him doesn't want to know. Ezra lowers his voice. "Not what, who, woman and her boy. Husband died in the mine collapse last spring. Couldn't pay her debts. Something cold and hard settles in Jackson's chest. Since the silver mine played out last year, Bitter Creek had descended further into lawlessness. The territorial marshals rarely ventured this far into the mountains, and whatever passed for local law had long been purchased by Wainwright and his cronies. "Not your concern, Blackwood," Ezra adds, noticing Jackson's darkening expression. "You're just passing through, remember? Smart men don't cross Wainwright in his own town." Jackson retrieves his saddlebags with a grunt that might pass for agreement. But as he trudges through the mud toward the hotel, the rain beating a relentless rhythm on his shoulders, he finds his steps slowing as he passes the flickering lanterns of the Rusty Nail, the sound of raucous laughter and the tinny notes of a poorly tuned piano spill from its doors, along with the familiar stench of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies. He tells himself to keep walking. Whatever misery waits inside those walls isn't his burden to bear. He's got cattle to sell, supplies to purchase, and a long ride home ahead of him. The last thing he needs is trouble with Wainwright and his thugs. Yet something pulls at him, perhaps the ghost of his wife Eleanor whispering in his ear. She'd been the conscience he sometimes lacked, the gentle voice urging compassion when his instinct was to remain uninvolved. In the 3 years since losing her and their young son to scarlet fever, he'd retreated further into solitude, speaking only when necessary for trade, avoiding entanglements of any kind. Before he can reconsider, Jackson finds himself pushing through the swinging doors of the saloon. The wall of noise hits him first, men shouting, glasses clinking, the piano player pounding out a jaunty tune that clashes with the grim purpose gathering the crowd. Through the haze of pipe smoke, he sees them assembled in a rough circle at the far end of the room. In the center stands Luther Wainwright, a corpulent man with a waxed mustache and silk, waistcoat stretched tight across his considerable girth. His jeweled fingers gesture dramatically as he addresses the crowd of miners, traders, and drifters. "Gentlemen, our next item comes with certain advantages for the discerning bachelor," Wainwright announces with theatrical flair. Mrs. Abigail Foster may not possess the delicate constitution of youth, but she brings practical experience in household management, cooking, and, he pauses for effect, other wifely duties. The crowd's laughter has an ugly edge. Jackson pushes forward, towering over most of the men, until he can see the woman standing on a makeshift platform. Her head is bowed, long brown hair hanging limply around a tear-streaked face. She's dressed in a threadbare dress that might once have been blue, but has faded to the color of winter sky. She's not slight. Her figure shows the softness that comes from bearing children, but there's a dignity in the way she holds herself despite her humiliation. Beside her stands a boy of perhaps 7 or 8, thin-faced and terrified, clutching his mother's skirts with white-knuckled hands. The sight of him hits Jackson like a physical blow, reminding him painfully of his own son. Bidding starts. At the price of her outstanding debt, $200 or equivalent in gold dust or trade goods, Wainwright continues. "I remind you, gentlemen, this transaction is fully legal." Mrs. Foster signed a contract pledging herself as collateral. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "She signed because you threatened her boy," calls a woman's voice from the sidelines. One of the saloon girls, quickly silenced by a glare from Wainwright. "Do I hear an opening bid?" Wainwright continues. Smoothly. $50, calls a grizzled miner, his eyes roving over Abigail with naked assessment. "The lady's worth more than that, Jenkins," Wainwright chides. "Remember, you're bidding on years of service." 75 and a case of whiskey, offers another man, a trader Jackson recognizes from previous cattle sales. As the bidding continues, Jackson studies the woman more carefully. There's something in her posture that speaks of endurance rather than surrender. Despite her tears, her spine remains straight, her shoulders squared. She endures this degradation not from weakness, but from a mother's fierce determination to protect her child. The boy looks up suddenly, his gaze meeting Jackson's across the crowded room. Those eyes, filled with a desperate plea and the fading embers of hope, knock something loose in Jackson's chest. A door he'd sealed shut when he'd buried his family 3 years ago cracks open. Just a fraction. 100 and a quarter, calls a voice, dragging Jackson's attention back to the auction. 150 and 2 bottles of the good stuff, counters another. "Do I hear 175? Wainwright asks, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Jackson. "Ah, Mr. Blackwood, our resident cattle baron graces us with his presence. Care to place a bid? Mrs. Foster would make an excellent housekeeper for that big, empty ranch of yours." All eyes turn to Jackson, who becomes acutely aware of the mud on his boots, the trail dust on his coat, and the several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He hadn't planned to speak, certainly hadn't planned to involve himself in whatever sordid business Wainwright had concocted. Yet he finds himself stepping forward, his voice cutting through the smoky air. $200. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Wainwright's eyebrows rise in surprise, then settle into a calculating expression. $200 from Mr. Blackwood. Do I hear 225? The miner who'd opened the bidding spits. On the floor. Not worth it. Woman's too old and too fat for my taste. Jackson's hands clench at his sides. For the first time, Abigail raises her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes are the color of amber in lamplight, filled with a mixture of fear, shame, and the barest flicker of hope. The boy peers around her skirts, his expression cautiously hopeful. 200 going once, Wainwright announces, scanning the room. Going twice. 200 and a case of Kentucky bourbon, interrupts a new voice from the doorway. A tall man in a black coat steps forward, his features obscured by the shadow of his hat. Finest quality, just arrived from the east. Wainwright's face lights up with avarice. Now that's more like it. 200 cash plus premium spirits from our friend Mr. Holloway. Jackson recognizes Holloway as Wainwright's right-hand man, a man rumored to handle the difficult aspects of his employer's business dealings. The idea of this woman and her child falling into Holloway's hands sends a chill through him that has nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothes. $300, Jackson says, his voice carrying an edge that silences the room. Wainwright's smile widens. My. Quite eager, aren't we, Mr. Blackwood? 300 from our cattle baron. Holloway steps closer, his cold eyes assessing. Jackson with clinical detachment. 350. Jackson meets his gaze without flinching. 400. The saloon has grown utterly silent now, the piano player's fingers hovering motionless above the keys. Even the rain seems to pause its relentless drumming against the roof, as Wainwright looks between the two men, naked greed warring with caution on his fleshy face. $400 is a princely sum, Wainwright says slowly. But Mr. Holloway's bourbon is worth at least 500, Jackson interrupts. Cash right now. He reaches into his coat and produces a leather pouch, heavy with the proceeds from his last cattle sale. Money meant for winter supplies and breeding stock. Money that represents months of backbreaking work. Holloway's hand drifts toward his coat pocket, where Jackson suspects a pistol waits, but Wainwright places a restraining hand on his associate's arm. $500 from Mr. Blackwood, Wainwright announces, unable to conceal his satisfaction at the unexpected windfall. Going once, going twice, sold. A collective exhalation ripples through the crowd. Some men turn back to their drinks, disappointed or disinterested now that the entertainment has concluded. Others watch with undisguised curiosity as Jackson approaches the platform, counting out bills from his pouch. Abigail Foster stands frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and trepidation. The boy clings tighter to her skirts, his eyes wide as he stares up at Jackson's imposing figure. Transaction complete, Wainwright declares after counting the money twice. He produces a document with a flourish. Mrs. Foster is now legally bound to your service, Mr. Blackwood, as per the terms of her contract. I assume you'll want to claim your property immediately. The word property lands like a slap. Jackson doesn't dignify it with a response, instead turning to face Abigail directly. Mrs. Foster, he says, his voice low enough that only she can hear. I have a room at the hotel. You and your boy can stay there tonight. I'll take the chair. Tomorrow after I conclude my business, I'll arrange transportation to my ranch, if that's acceptable to you. Confusion clouds her features. Your ranch? It's a 3-day ride northwest of here, isolated but sound. There's work there, if you want it. Paid work, he emphasizes. Or I can arrange passage to Helena or beyond if you prefer. Suspicion replaces confusion in her amber eyes. Why would you do this? What do you want from me? A fair question. One he's not entirely sure he can answer. Nothing you don't freely choose to give, he says finally. I've seen what men like Wainwright do to towns like this. I couldn't watch it happen again, not when I could stop it. Her gaze searches his face, looking for deception or hidden motives. The boy tugs at her skirt, whispering urgently, Mama, can we go now, please? Abigail straightens her shoulders and nods once, a gesture containing neither gratitude nor submission, merely pragmatic acceptance of her limited options. Very well, Mr. Blackwood. We accept your offer of shelter for tonight. Jackson offers his arm with formal courtesy, ignoring the lewd suggestions and ribald laughter that follow them as they make their way through the crowded saloon. The boy, whose name he still doesn't know, scampers ahead, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. At the door, Jackson pauses, turning back to meet Wainwright's satisfied smirk and Holloway's cold stare. Some warning instinct tells him this transaction isn't truly complete, that men like them don't surrender their prey so easily, regardless of money exchanged. But that's a concern for tomorrow. Tonight, he has two unexpected charges to shelter, and the strange sensation that his life has just veered dramatically from its solitary course. Outside, the rain has finally stopped. The night air smells of wet earth and wood smoke, cleaner than the stale whiskey and desperation of the saloon. Abigail's face tilts upward, drinking in deep breaths, as if she's been underwater for too long. The boy darts ahead, splashing through puddles with sudden childish exuberance, before remembering himself and waiting at the hotel's entrance. In the lamplight, Jackson notices a resemblance to his mother. The same determined chin, the same watchful eyes. "My son's name is William," Abigail says quietly, following Jackson's gaze. "He's 8 years old. My husband called him Billy." It's the first personal information she's volunteered, and Jackson recognizes it for what it is, not just information, but a declaration that they are people with names and histories, not property to be purchased. "I'm Jackson Blackwood," he responds, realizing he hasn't properly introduced himself. "My ranch is called Evergreen, though there are more pines than evergreens, truth be told." A ghost of a smile touches her lips before disappearing. "Why did you do it, Mr. Blackwood? $500 is more than I planned to spend tonight," he acknowledges with a wry nod. "But less than I could live with if I'd walked away." The hotel proprietor barely glances up from his newspaper as they enter, though his eyebrows rise slightly at the sight of a woman and child accompanying the solitary rancher. Jackson secures the room with a few coins and leads them up creaking stairs to a narrow chamber with a single bed, washstand, and spindly chair. "I'll arrange for hot water and food," he says, suddenly awkward in the small space. "And I'll remain downstairs until morning, once you've settled." Abigail's shoulders sag with exhaustion, but her eyes remain wary. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to understand the nature of our arrangement." "The contract I signed is worthless," Jackson interrupts. "Coerced agreements have no standing in any court that matters. You don't belong to Wainwright, and you don't belong to me." "Then why?" "Because it was the fastest way to get you and your boy out of there," he says simply. "Tomorrow we can decide what happens next. Tonight, just rest." William has already climbed onto the bed, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. His eyes drift closed even as he fights to stay awake, clearly afraid this reprieve might vanish if he doesn't remain vigilant. Something in Jackson's expression must reassure Abigail, because she nods slowly. "Thank you, for tonight at least." As Jackson turns to leave, she speaks again, her voice stronger. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what circumstances led you to that auction tonight, but I want you to know that before my husband died, I ran our household and helped manage accounts for 3 other mining families. I can cook, sew, tend livestock, and keep books. I'm not looking for charity." Pride and determination radiate from her despite her bedraggled appearance. Jackson recognizes the spirit of a survivor, someone who, like him, has endured loss but refused to be broken by it. "Noted, Mrs. Foster," he says with a respectful nod. "We'll talk more in the morning." Downstairs in the hotel's small common room, Jackson settles into a worn armchair positioned to give him clear sight lines to both the stairs and the front entrance. He doesn't think Wainwright will attempt anything tonight. The man prefers manipulation to direct confrontation, but caution has kept him alive this long. As he stretches his long legs toward the dying fire, he wonders what Eleanor would make of his impulsive action tonight. She'd probably laugh that warm, knowing laugh of hers, the one that appeared whenever he tried to pretend he didn't care about something when he clearly did. "You never could stand by when someone weaker was being mistreated," she'd say. "It's why I fell in love with you, even though you pretended to be such a hard case." The memory brings a bittersweet ache rather than the sharp pain of earlier years. Perhaps that's progress. Jackson doesn't intend to sleep, but the warmth of the fire and the exhaustion of his journey eventually pull him under. He dreams of Eleanor, but for once, she isn't pale and fever-stricken as she was in her final days. Instead, she stands in the doorway of their ranch house, smiling and pointing toward the horizon where storm clouds gather and break apart, revealing clear blue sky beyond. When he wakes at dawn, stiff-necked from the awkward position, the dream lingers like a half-remembered tune. He stretches, works the kinks from his shoulders, and orders breakfast from the sleepy-eyed hotel clerk, enough for 3 people. Upstairs, he knocks softly on the door, mindful of the early hour. It opens almost immediately, revealing Abigail fully dressed, her hair neatly braided and her face freshly washed. The transformation is subtle but significant, in the clear morning light. He can see that she's younger than he initially thought, perhaps in her early 30s. Her face, free from yesterday's tear streaks, reveals fine features and those remarkable amber eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she says with formal politeness. "William is still sleeping. Breakfast will be here shortly," he replies. "I need to check on my horse and make arrangements for my cattle sale. Will you and the boy be all right here for an hour?" She nods, then hesitates. "Mr. Blackwood, about last night. I've been thinking about your offer." "Which one?" he asks. "Either, both." She takes a deep breath. "If your offer of employment is genuine, William and I would prefer that to passage elsewhere. We have nowhere else to go, and starting over in a new town with no resources or connections would be difficult," he supplies when she trails off. "Yes, but I want to be clear. I'm accepting a position as your housekeeper or ranch assistant, nothing more." "I won't be." She lifts her chin, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I won't be warming your bed as payment for your assistance." The blunt declaration takes him by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't. A woman in her position would have good reason to clarify such boundaries. "Mrs. Foster," he says carefully, "I purchased your contract to prevent an injustice, not to acquire a companion. The position I'm offering is exactly as stated, paid employment with fair treatment. Nothing more, nothing less." Relief flickers across her features before her expression turns practical again. "Then we accept. When do we leave?" "After the cattle auction, midday or thereabouts. I need to purchase supplies as well." He hesitates, then reaches into his pocket, extracting a few bills. "For anything you and the boy might need. Clothes, food, whatever's necessary." She accepts the money with a nod that acknowledges the practical necessity rather than seeing it as charity. "We'll be ready when you return." As Jackson heads to the livery stable, his mind catalogs the adjustments he'll need to make. The ranch house has 3 bedrooms, his the one that had been his son's, and a smaller room used for storage. That one could be cleared out for the boy. Mrs. Foster could take the master bedroom. He could move his things to the smaller room off the kitchen that Eleanor had used as a sewing room. Food supplies would need to be increased. The vegetable garden, neglected since Eleanor's death, could be revived come spring. The thought of fresh produce again after years of basic sustenance cooking brings an unexpected pang of anticipation. Lost in these practical considerations, he almost doesn't notice the man leaning against the corner of the general store until he speaks. Quite the humanitarian, Blackwood. Holloway's voice is smooth as oil on water, rescuing damsels in distress, very noble. Jackson continues walking, not breaking stride. "Just business, Holloway. Nothing that concerns you." Holloway falls into step beside him, his long legs matching Jackson's pace. "Everything in Bitter Creek concerns me, especially when it involves Mr. Wainwright's interests. He got his money. More than the woman owed him." "True." Holloway smiles thinly. "But you interrupted what promised to be an entertaining evening. Mr. Wainwright doesn't appreciate such disruptions." They've reached the livery stable. Jackson stops, turning to face the taller man directly. Say what you came to say. Holloway's cold eyes assess him with clinical detachment. Just a friendly warning. Bitter Creek has rules. Those who break them often find themselves facing unfortunate accidents. Mining towns are dangerous places after all. I'll be gone by noon, Jackson says evenly. With your new acquisitions. Holloway nods. How generous of you. One might almost think you had personal reasons for such charity. Jackson steps closer, using his bulk to force Holloway back a pace. One might think it's none of their damn business. For a moment, tension crackles between them. Then Holloway raises his hands in mock surrender, stepping back. As you say, safe travels, Blackwood. The mountain passes can be treacherous this time of year, especially for those traveling with encumbrances. The implied threat hangs in the air as Holloway turns and strolls away, whistling tunelessly. Between his teeth, Ezra emerges from the stable, eyeing Jackson warily. Holloway's not a man to cross, Blackwood. Neither is Wainwright. I'm aware, Jackson replies grimly. How quickly can you ready my horse and wagon? I need to conclude my business and leave town as soon as possible. Ezra's roomy eyes narrow with understanding. Give me an hour. And use the back roads out of town, not the main trail. Less chance. Oh, complications. Jackson nods his thanks and heads to the cattle pens where his small herd waits. The auction proceeds more quickly than usual, with Jackson accepting the first reasonable offer rather than holding out for the best price. He purchases supplies with the same efficiency: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, and winter staples. His final stop is the general store, where he selects warm clothing for both Abigail and William, guessing at sizes. The shopkeeper's wife helps, adding practical items he wouldn't have thought of: a hairbrush, socks, a small wooden toy for the boy. That foster woman's had a hard time of it, she comments as she wraps the purchases in brown paper. Husband was a good man before the accident. She nursed him for weeks before the end came. Wouldn't leave his side, not even to rest properly. Wainwright moved in like a vulture the moment the funeral was over. Jackson grunts non-committally, not wanting to encourage gossip, but the woman continues anyway. She tried everything to keep afloat. Took in washing, did mending, even helped Doc Miller with his accounts. But with winter coming and the boy needing proper food, she sighs, tying string around the packages. Not many options for a woman alone in a place like Bitter Creek. She won't be alone anymore, Jackson says, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. The shopkeeper's wife gives him an appraising look. No, I suppose she won't. You tell her Martha Jenkins says to write when she's settled. I'd like to know she's all right. By the time Jackson returns to the hotel, the wagon is loaded and waiting at the back entrance, as Ezra had suggested. Abigail and William are ready, their few possessions packed in a small carpet bag. The boy looks better rested, though wariness still shadows his young face. Mr. Blackwood got new clothes for us, Billy, Abigail tells her son, opening one of the packages. Wasn't that thoughtful? The boy eyes Jackson suspiciously. Are you really taking us to a ranch? With horses and everything? 6 horses, Jackson confirms. 2 working teams, my riding horse, and a mare about to foal. William's eyes widen with reluctant interest. A baby horse? Should arrive before the first snow, if my calculations are correct. Something that might be excitement flickers across the boy's face before he suppresses it, clearly not willing to trust this unexpected turn of fortune just yet. As they load the last of their meager possessions into the wagon, Jackson notices Holloway watching from across the street, his lean figure partially obscured by the overhang of the barber shop. A warning prickles at the base of Jackson's spine. We need to leave now, he says quietly to Abigail. And we won't be taking the main road. She follows his gaze, her expression hardening when she spots Holloway, Wainwright's pet snake. He's the one who came to deliver the final notice the day before. She stops, shaking her head. Yes, let's go. The rain has turned the back. Roads to mud, making for slow progress as they leave Bitter Creek behind. William sits between them on the wagon seat, gradually relaxing as the squalid mining town recedes into the distance. By mid-afternoon, when they stop to rest the horses at a small creek, he's asking cautious questions about the ranch and watching Jackson with growing curiosity rather than fear. "Will I have chores?" he asks as Jackson checks the horse's hooves. "For stones. Pa always said a boy needs to earn his keep." "Your father was right," Jackson replies, straightening up. "Every hand on a ranch has jobs to do, even the youngest. But there's time for learning and playing too." Abigail, arranging a simple meal of bread and jerky on a fallen log, watches this exchange with guarded optimism. For the first time since Jackson met her, she allows herself a genuine smile when her son eagerly accepts the responsibility of filling their water canteens from the creek. "He's been so withdrawn since his father died," she says quietly. "It's good to see a spark of his old self again." Jackson nods, understanding more than he can express. He remembers his own son's enthusiasm for ranch chores, the way he'd insisted on helping with the horses from the time he could walk. The memory brings a familiar ache, but it's tempered now by the sight of William carefully carrying the full canteen's back, his small face set with concentration. As they prepare to continue their journey, Jackson helps Abigail up to the wagon seat, noticing the way she winces slightly. "You're injured?" he asks. She shakes her head dismissively. "Just sore. The last few weeks have been difficult." He understands what she doesn't say, that Wainwright or his men likely didn't treat her gently when collecting their so-called debt. Anger flares in his chest, but he pushes it down. Getting her and the boys safely to Evergreen is what matters. Now they travel until dusk, making camp in a sheltered hollow where the pines provide some protection from the wind that's picked up as the day waned. Jackson builds a small fire and prepares a simple meal of beans and salt pork, surprised when Abigail takes over the cooking with quiet efficiency. "You don't have to earn your keep tonight," he says, watching her work. "I prefer to be useful," she replies simply. "Idleness gives me too much time to think, and my thoughts haven't been pleasant companions lately." He understands this too, the need to keep moving, keep working, to outrun grief and fear through sheer physical effort. It's been his own strategy for 3 years. After they eat, William falls asleep almost immediately, wrapped in blankets near the fire. Abigail sits across from Jackson, the dancing flames illuminating her face in shifting patterns of light and shadow. "Tell me about Evergreen," she says, breaking the companionable silence. "What kind of place will it be for my son?" Jackson considers the question carefully. It's remote. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Town's a full day's ride. The house is solid. 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, root cellar that stays cool even in summer. Land's good for grazing, with enough flat ground for crops if you're inclined toward gardening. And the winters? Hard, he admits. Snow can cut us off for weeks at a time. But the house stays warm with proper firewood, and I keep ample supplies. She nods, absorbing this information with practical consideration. And what exactly will my duties entail? Cooking, cleaning, household management, he lists. Help with planting and harvest when the season comes. I'll pay you fair wages with room and board for you and the boy. And will I be expected to entertain you or any ranch hands in other ways? Her direct gaze challenges him to answer with equal honesty. No, he says firmly. Never. There are no ranch hands. I've been running the place alone since. My wife and son died 3 years ago. As for the other, I told you before, I'm offering employment, not seeking a replacement for what I've lost. Something in his tone must convince her, because she nods once, decisively. Very well, Mr. Blackwood. I accept your terms. She hesitates, then adds, My husband used to say I make the best sourdough bread west of the Mississippi. I suppose. We'll see if he was right. It's such an unexpected domestic detail that Jackson finds himself smiling for what feels like the first time in years. I look forward to the test, Mrs. Foster. As she settles down beside her son, Jackson takes the first watch, his rifle across his knees. He doesn't truly expect Wainwright's men to have followed them, not tonight, at least, but caution has become second nature. In the deep quiet of the mountain night, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional hoot of an owl, Jackson finds himself contemplating the strange turn his solitary life has taken. 24 hours ago, he'd been riding alone through the rain, his only concern the price his cattle might fetch. Now he sits guard over a woman and child he barely knows, having spent nearly all his ready money to free them from a predator's grasp. Eleanor would approve, he thinks. She'd always believed in following the heart's better instincts, even when the mind counseled caution. Perhaps that's why he'd done it, not just to prevent an injustice, but to honor her memory in a way that felt more meaningful than simply enduring his isolation. As the fire burns low and the stars wheel overhead, Jackson Blackwood allows himself to consider, for the first time in 3 years, the possibility that his life might contain more than memories and regrets. It's a fragile hope, as delicate as the first green shoots after a long winter. But as he watches Abigail Foster's sleeping form, her arm protectively draped over her son, he finds himself willing to nurture that hope, to see what might grow from this unexpected beginning. The journey to Evergreen Ranch would take 3 more days of hard traveling through increasingly rugged terrain. But sitting by that small campfire, with the vast Montana night spread out above him, Jackson feels something he'd thought lost forever. The quiet certainty that he's exactly where he's meant to be. By the second day of their journey to Evergreen Ranch, the skies had cleared to reveal the majestic sweep of Montana's autumn landscape. Golden aspen trees dotted the hillsides among the dark pines, their leaves shimmering like coins when the breeze touched them. For Abigail Foster, each mile that separated them from Bitter Creek eased a fraction of the tension that had become her constant companion over the past months. "Look, Mama," William called from his perch on the wagon seat between her and Jackson. "Eagles." He pointed skyward where 2 raptors circled lazily on thermal currents, their wingspan impressive even at a distance. "Red-tailed hawks," Jackson corrected gently. "Good hunters. They mate for life." William absorbed this information with solemn interest. Since leaving Bitter Creek, the boy had gradually emerged from his protective shell, asking questions about everything they encountered. Jackson answered each one with patient consideration, treating the child's curiosity with respect rather than indulgence. "Like you and Mrs. Blackwood did?" William asked, his child's directness cutting straight to the heart of matters adults, typically circled with careful words. Abigail tensed, ready to admonish her son for prying, but Jackson's expression remained thoughtful rather than offended. "Yes," he said simply, "like Eleanor and I did." "My pa and ma were mated for life too," William declared. "Until the mountain took pa." Jackson glanced at Abigail, a silent question in his eyes. "There was a collapse in the western tunnel," she explained quietly. "Robert was trapped with 3 other men. By the time they reached them—" She left the sentence unfinished, her hand automatically moving to smooth William's unruly hair. "I'm sorry," Jackson said, the words carrying the weight of someone who truly understood loss rather than merely acknowledging it. Abigail nodded, accepting his sympathy without comment. She'd grown wary of the hollow consolations offered by those who had never felt grief's true measure. They made camp that evening near a stand of pines, the wagon positioned to block the wind that carried autumn's first real chill. William helped gather kindling, his small arms laden with sticks as he proudly contributed to their evening preparations. After a simple meal of beans, hardtack, and dried apples, the boy fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's travels. Abigail remained by the fire, her hands busy mending a tear in William's shirt. Jackson sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision, the familiar routine requiring no conscious thought. "Tell me about your wife," Abigail said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. Jackson's hands paused momentarily before resuming their work. "Eleanor was a schoolteacher before we married. Came west from Boston to teach at the Territorial School in Helena. That's where I met her, delivering beef for a reception at the governor's mansion. A cultured woman then. More than I deserved," he acknowledged with a small smile. "She could recite Shakespeare from memory and play the piano beautifully, but she wasn't afraid to help birth calves or mend fences when needed. She used to say that life required both poetry and practicality." Abigail tried to picture this refined woman who had chosen a rancher's hard life out of love. "And your son, Thomas?" "He was 5 when the fever took them both." Jackson's voice remained steady, but his hands stilled on the rifle. "He had his mother's quick mind and my stubborn streak. Would have made a fine rancher someday." The simple declaration, devoid of self-pity, touched something in Abigail. "I'm sorry for asking. I didn't mean to cause pain." "You didn't," he assured her. "Remembering hurts less than trying to forget." They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in private thoughts as the fire crackled between them. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamond dust. "Robert wasn't a miner by trade," Abigail said eventually. "He was a carpenter, trained in St. Louis before coming west. But when we arrived in Bitter Creek, the town was booming with silver strikes. The money in mining was too good to pass up, especially with a child to feed." Jackson nodded, understanding the calculus that drove such decisions. A skilled craftsman. "That explains the boy's hands." Abigail looked up in surprise. "You noticed? He has a craftsman's attention to detail. The way he arranged the kindling tonight, each piece placed just so." Jackson reassembled his rifle with practiced ease. "Skills like that shouldn't go to waste." There wasn't much call for carpentry in Bitter Creek, not after the mine started failing, Abigail sighed. And then after Robert died, just keeping food on the table became. She trailed off, unwilling to revisit those desperate months. "How did Wainwright get his hooks into you?" Jackson asked, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. Abigail's fingers tightened on the shirt she was mending. "It started small. Advances on Robert's wages when he was injured the first time. Then loans for medicine when he developed the cough that all the miners get eventually. After he died, there were the funeral expenses, then winter coming on and William needing proper boots. And each time the interest grew," Jackson finished for her. "Like a living thing, consuming everything we had," she agreed bitterly. "By spring, he owned our cabin, most of our possessions, and according to him, $200 more. When I couldn't pay, he offered an alternative, sign myself over as collateral or watch my son go hungry. The stark choice hung in the air between them." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he didn't offer empty reassurances or condemnation. "What would you have done?" she asked quietly, "if no one had been there to bid on us that night?" His answer came without hesitation. "Whatever was necessary." Abigail believed him. Despite knowing him for barely 2 days, she recognized in Jackson Blackwood a quality her father had called bedrock character, a fundamental decency that ran soul deep, unshakable regardless of circumstance. "We should rest," he said, changing the subject. "Tomorrow's trail gets rougher before it improves." He was right. The next day brought them into steeper country, the wagon jolting over rocky terrain that tested both horses and passengers. By midday, they were following a narrow trail that hugged a mountainside, the drop to their right steep enough to make Abigail hold William close against her side. "Almost a granite pass," Jackson announced, guiding the team with expert hands. "Once we're through, it's easier going to the ranch." The trail widened as they approached the pass, allowing them to stop at a small plateau that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Forests of pine and aspen spread like a patchwork quilt over the mountains, interspersed with meadows turned golden by autumn's touch. "Is that your land?" William asked, pointing to the distant valley. "Part of it," Jackson confirmed. "Evergreen. Sits in that sheltered basin beyond the second ridge. Good water, good grazing, natural boundaries that help keep the cattle contained." Something in his voice when he spoke of his land reminded Abigail of Robert, that same quiet pride in having claimed a piece of the world through honest work. It was a distinctly American quality, this belief that a person could remake themselves through labor and determination, that past misfortunes needn't define future possibilities. As they prepared to continue their journey, a sound reached them. The distant but unmistakable crack of a rifle shot, followed by another. Jackson's reaction was immediate. He handed the reins to Abigail and reached for his own rifle. "Stay here," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "Keep down and keep the boy close." Before she could protest, he had moved toward a cluster of boulders that offered a vantage point over the trail behind them. Abigail pulled William against her, one hand covering his mouth to prevent any sound that might give away their position. Long minutes passed, the silence broken only by the occasional snort from the horses and the whisper of wind through the pines. Then came the sound of approaching hoofbeats, multiple riders moving at speed. Jackson was back in an instant, his expression grim. 3 riders coming fast. "Could be nothing, but I don't believe in coincidences." He helped them down from the wagon. "There's a game trail through those trees. Follow it about 50 yards to a rocky overhang. Wait there until I come for you." "What are you going to do?" Abigail asked, even as she gathered William's hand in hers. "Discourage uninvited guests," he replied, checking his rifle. "Go now." She went, half dragging William along the narrow trail that wound between pines and granite outcroppings. The boy, sensing the urgency, remained blessedly silent. They found the overhang, a shallow depression beneath a massive boulder, and huddled inside its protective shadow. From their hiding place, they could see a portion of the plateau where their wagon stood. Jackson had positioned himself behind a fallen tree, rifle ready, his expression set in lines of grim determination. The riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, 3 men on lathered horses that spoke of hard riding. Even at this distance, Abigail recognized Holloway's tall figure. The other 2 were strangers to her, but their rough appearance and the casual way they handled their weapons marked them as the kind of men who did Wainwright's dirty work. "Blackwood." Holloway's voice carried clearly in the mountain air. "We know you're here. No need to make this difficult." Jackson remained silent, unmoving in his concealed position. "All we want is the woman and boy," Holloway continued, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. "Mr. Wainwright feels their business in Bitter Creek remains unfinished." William trembled against Abigail, his small body rigid with fear. She held him closer, whispering reassurances she didn't fully believe herself. "Think about it, Blackwood," Holloway called out. "Is some mining town whore worth dying for? Her husband couldn't pay his debts, and neither could she. That makes her Wainwright's property, legal and proper." The insult landed like a physical blow. Abigail closed her eyes, shame and rage warring within her. When she opened them again, she saw that Jackson had shifted position slightly, now with a clearer line of sight to the intruders. "Last chance," Holloway announced, signaling his companions to spread out. "Give them up now, and you can go on your way. Otherwise—" He left the threat unspoken, but his meaning was clear. The crack of Jackson's rifle split the air. One of Holloway's men cried out, clutching his arm as his horse reared in panic. The second shot followed immediately, striking the ground at Holloway's feet, sending dust and rock fragments flying. "That was your warning," Jackson's voice boomed across the clearing. "The next one won't be." Holloway's face contorted with rage. "You're making a mistake, Blackwood. Wainwright doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." "Neither do I," came Jackson's reply, cold as mountain ice. "Now get off my land before I decide Montana needs 3 less vermin." For a tense moment, it seemed Holloway might press the attack. His hand hovered near his pistol, his eyes scanning the trees for Jackson's position. But the wounded man was moaning, blood seeping between his fingers, and the third rider looked increasingly nervous. "This isn't over," Holloway spat, wheeling his horse around. "You've made an enemy today." "I've made worse," Jackson replied calmly. They watched as the 3 riders departed, pushing their mounts hard back down the trail they had come. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Jackson emerge from his position, signaling for Abigail and William to join him. "Are they gone for good?" William asked, his voice small but steady. Jackson ruffled the boy's hair with unexpected gentleness. "For now. They won't try again today. That man needs attention for his arm, and they'll need to regroup." He turned to Abigail, his expression grave. "But Holloway doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily." "No," she agreed, thinking of the cold determination she'd seen in the man's eyes at the auction. "He isn't." "Then we need to make Evergreen before nightfall," Jackson decided, helping them back into the wagon. "The ranch is more defensible than the open trail." As they continued their journey through Granite Pass, Abigail found herself studying Jackson's profile, the firm set of his jaw, the watchful alertness in his eyes, the capable hands that held both reins and rifle with equal confidence. He had killed men before. She could see it in the efficient way he had handled the confrontation, without hesitation or uncertainty. Yet there was nothing cruel in him, nothing that suggested he took pleasure in violence. Rather, he reminded her of the mountain lions that sometimes prowled the forest around Bitter Creek, dangerous when threatened, but not malicious, simply doing what was necessary to protect what was theirs. The thought gave her pause. When had she and William become his to protect? And why did the idea bring comfort rather than alarm? The remainder of their journey passed without incident, though Jackson maintained a vigilant watch, his rifle never far from reach. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they crested a final ridge, and Abigail got her first glimpse of Evergreen Ranch. Nestled in a sheltered valley between protective mountains, the ranch spread across nearly 100 acres of prime grazing land. A clear stream wound through meadows still green despite the advancing autumn. At the center stood a substantial log house, larger than she had expected, with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Nearby stood a barn, corral, smokehouse, and various outbuildings, all constructed with the same solid craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. After the grimy confines of Bitter Creek, with its ramshackle buildings and muddy streets, Evergreen seemed like something from a dream, ordered, peaceful, built to last. "Eleanor planned most of it," Jackson acknowledged, a note of pride in his voice. "Said if we were going to live this far from civilization, we should at least have a proper home." As they approached, Abigail could see signs of neglect that spoke eloquently of the ranch's recent history: shutters hanging askew, garden, beds overgrown with weeds, a fence section sagging where posts had rotted. Nothing terminal, just the slow decay that comes when grief displaces care. William, however, saw none of this. "Are those horses?" he exclaimed, pointing to the corral where several animals grazed, including a heavily pregnant mare. "That's Willow," Jackson said, nodding toward the expectant mother. "Should foal any day now. Perhaps you can help me keep an eye on her." The boy's face lit up with the first genuine excitement Abigail had seen since Robert's death. "Can I really?" "A ranch needs all hands working," Jackson replied matter-of-factly. "Even the smallest ones." They pulled up before the house just as the sun touched the western mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber light. Jackson helped them down from the wagon, then began unloading their meager belongings and the supplies he'd purchased in Bitter Creek. Abigail found herself hesitating at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly uncertain. This was the moment fantasy collided with reality, when the abstract idea of working for Jackson Blackwood became the concrete fact of living in his home, adapting to his ways, finding her place in a world built by and for others. Jackson seemed to sense her hesitation. "It's not much," he said, misinterpreting her pause as disappointment. "But it's sound and warm. The roof doesn't leak except in the worst storms, and the well water is sweet." "It's more than I expected," she assured him quickly. "It's just—" She struggled to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her, gratitude mingled with apprehension, relief with uncertainty. "It's just that you're wondering if you've leapt from one form of dependence to another." He finished for her, his perception startling in its accuracy. Before she could respond, he continued, "The southwest bedroom is yours, largest after the master. William can have the room that was—" He hesitated fractionally. "The small room down the hall. I'll take the back bedroom off the kitchen. It's small, but I don't need much space." The deliberate allocation of the best rooms to her and William, the careful way he avoided mentioning his son directly, these small kindnesses steadied her. This was not Wainwright's calculated manipulation or Holloway's veiled threats. This was a man doing his awkward best to make strangers feel welcome in a home that had known too much sadness. "Thank you," she said simply, and mounted the steps. The interior of the house was surprisingly spacious, with a large central room containing a stone fireplace, sturdy dining table, and several well-made chairs. Bookshelves lined one wall, unexpected in a ranch house, filled with volumes whose varied bindings suggested careful collection rather than decoration. Jackson moved efficiently around the space, lighting lamps against the gathering dusk, stoking the banked fire in the hearth, bringing in their belongings. William explored with the natural curiosity of childhood, exclaiming over discoveries: a carved chess set on a side table, a collection of polished stones on the mantelpiece, a telescope positioned near the western window. Eleanor liked to study the stars, Jackson explained when he noticed the boy examining the instrument. Said it reminded her that our troubles are small in the grand scheme of things. "My pa said something similar," William replied, touching the brass tube with gentle fingers. "He said when you're deep in the mine, you have to remember the sky is still there, even if you can't see it." Something passed across Jackson's face, recognition, perhaps, of the wisdom that working men across all professions share. The philosophies born of intimate acquaintance with nature's power and indifference. "Your father sounds like a man I would have respected," he said. "He would have liked you too," William declared with a child's certainty. "You're both big and quiet and know about important things." The simple assessment brought a ghost of a smile to Jackson's weathered face. High praise indeed. He turned to Abigail. "There should be enough preserved food in the pantry for a decent meal tonight. Tomorrow we can see about proper restocking." She nodded, already moving toward what she presumed was the kitchen, eager to establish her usefulness. The kitchen proved to be Eleanor Blackwood's domain in every sense, well organized, practical, with copper pots hanging from a ceiling rack and a massive cast-iron stove dominating one wall. Everything a ranch wife would need to feed hungry men after long days of work. Abigail ran her hands over the smooth wooden countertop, noting the way the years of use had polished it to a soft sheen. How many meals had Eleanor prepared here? How many conversations had she shared with her husband across this space? The ghosts of their domestic life lingered in every corner. Yet rather than feeling like an intruder, Abigail found herself drawn to this evidence of another woman's careful stewardship. Eleanor had created order and comfort in this remote place, had transformed a house into a home. Perhaps Abigail could honor that legacy by doing the same, in her own way. She found flour, salt, lard, and dried beans in the pantry, along with preserved fruits and vegetables in glass jars, labeled in a neat feminine hand. Enough to prepare a simple but satisfying meal. As she worked, the familiar rhythms of cooking settled her nerves. This at least she knew how to do well. By the time Jackson returned from settling the horses and securing the barn for the night, she had hot biscuits, beans with salt pork, and stewed apples ready. William had set the table without being asked, arranging the plates and utensils with careful precision. Jackson paused in the doorway, something unreadable passing across his features as he took in the domestic scene. The table set, food steaming and serving dishes, William waiting expectantly in his chair, Abigail wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Smells good," he said finally, his voice slightly rough. Been a while since this kitchen produced anything more complicated than coffee and bacon. They ate in companionable silence, the day's journey having drained all three of excess energy. For conversation. Afterward, Abigail insisted on handling the washing up, while Jackson showed William to his room and helped him settle in. Later, as she prepared for bed in the southwest bedroom, a pleasant space with a large window overlooking the valley, Abigail found herself taking stock of the day's events. 24 hours ago, they had been camping under the stars, still within reach of Wainwright's influence. Now they were in a solid house with walls and doors between them and whatever dangers might lurk outside. Yet the confrontation with Holloway had made it clear that distance alone wouldn't ensure their safety. Wainwright was not a man to relinquish what he considered his property, regardless of money exchanged or papers signed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Jackson standing in the hallway, a folded quilt in his arms. "Nights get cold," he explained, offering the blanket. It's warm." He didn't need to say it had been Eleanor's. The careful way he handled the quilt, the slight hesitation in his voice, these told Abigail all she needed to know about its significance. "Thank you," she said, accepting it with equal care. "For everything." He nodded once, then turned to go. At the end of the hallway, he paused. "Holloway and his kind don't give up easily. We should be prepared for them to try again." "I know," she replied softly. "But neither do I," he added, his silhouette solid and reassuring against the lamplight. "Rest well, Mrs. Foster. You're home now." As she closed the door and spread the quilt over her bed, a beautiful piece worked in a pattern of interlocking stars, Abigail considered his parting words. Home, such a simple concept, yet so elusive for those who had known its loss. Could Evergreen become that for her and William? Not just shelter or employment, but truly home. The question followed her into sleep, where her dreams were a confusion of images. Robert smiling from the doorway of their cabin in Bitter Creek, William running through mountain meadows, Holloway's cold eyes watching from the shadows, and through it all, Jackson Blackwood standing firm against whatever threats the world might bring, his presence as solid and immovable as the mountains themselves. Dawn at Evergreen Ranch arrived with a symphony of colors, pale gold streaming through the eastern peaks, painting the valley in soft light that gradually revealed the details of what would become Abigail's new world. She stood on the porch, hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug, drinking in the quiet majesty of mountains etched against the awakening sky. In Bitter Creek, mornings had meant the clanging of shift bells, miners trudging past with hollow eyes and the omnipresent coal dust that settled on everything. Here, the air tasted clean, carrying the scent of pine and sage. "It's always like this," Jackson's voice came from behind her. "Eleanor called it God's painting hour." Abigail turned to find him standing in the doorway, his own coffee mug in hand. He looked different here, more at ease in his own space. The tension that had marked him during their journey slightly diminished. "It's magnificent," she agreed. "Worth waking early for." He joined her at the porch railing, maintaining a respectful distance. "Your room was comfortable?" Very. The quilt is beautiful. Your wife's handiwork? Jackson nodded, his expression softening. Eleanor believed useful things should also be beautiful when possible. Said it was a way of respecting daily life. The observation resonated with Abigail. Her own mother, before consumption had taken her when Abigail was 16, had embroidered delicate patterns on even the simplest dish towels, insisting that beauty needn't be reserved for special occasions. I found the sourdough starter in the root cellar, she said, changing the subject. Still alive, though it needs feeding. I could have bread ready by tomorrow. That would be welcome. A pause then. William still sleeping? Like a stone. The journey exhausted him. She hesitated, then added, he had nightmares for months after Robert died. Last night was the first time he slept through in, I can't remember how long. Jackson absorbed this information with a nod. Children are resilient, given half a chance. The ranch will be good for him, open spaces, animals to care for, purpose in his days. They stood in companionable silence, watching the light strengthen across the valley. In the distance, cattle grazed on the golden autumn grass, dark shapes against the landscape. I should check on Willow, Jackson said eventually. The mare. She was restless yesterday evening. Would William be in the way if he helped? He was asking about her the moment he opened his eyes. A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's face. No, he'd be welcome. He drained his coffee cup. There's a list on the kitchen table, tasks that need attention around the house. Don't feel obligated to tackle everything at once. It's been neglected for some time. With that, he headed toward the barn, his long strides eating up the distance. Abigail watched him go, appreciating the straightforward way he approached their arrangement. No false pleasantries or awkward attempts to make her feel welcome beyond what was practical. Just honest work and clear expectations. She returned to the kitchen to find William already dressed and wolfing down the oatmeal she'd left warming on the stove. Mr. Blackwood says you can help with the horses if you've finished your breakfast, she told him, smiling at the way his eyes lit up. The mare might have her baby today, he said between mouthfuls. He told me last night when he was showing me my room, said I could help name the foal if I wanted. Abigail felt a surge of gratitude toward Jackson for this small kindness. William had been obsessed with horses since he was tiny, drawing pictures of them, begging to pet the draft animals that pulled ore carts from the mines. In Bitter Creek, such opportunities had been limited. Here, his passion could flourish. Finish your breakfast first, she reminded him. Ranching is hungry work. Once William had bolted the last of his oatmeal and raced toward the barn, Abigail turned her attention to the list Jackson had mentioned. Written in a strong, no-nonsense hand, it outlined immediate needs: chopping kindling, checking food stores, repairing a broken shutter, as well as longer-term projects like replanting the kitchen garden come spring. At the bottom, a brief note: take what you need from Eleanor's things. No sense letting good cloth go to waste. The practical generosity of this gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Clothing had been among her greatest concerns. What she and William owned amounted to little more than what they wore, plus a few threadbare items in their carpet bag. The thought of decent dresses, perhaps even warm winter coats, represented security beyond what she'd dared hope for. Abigail began with the kitchen, taking inventory of what remained from Eleanor's careful housekeeping and what would need replenishing. The pantry revealed surprises: sealed crocks of honey, preserved fruits, even chocolate stored in airtight tins. Eleanor Blackwood had been a woman who planned ahead, who created abundance even in this remote place. From there, Abigail moved to the rest of the house, opening windows to release the faint mustiness of rooms too long closed. In what had clearly been Eleanor's sewing room, she found neatly folded fabrics, spools of thread, and patterns traced onto brown paper, resources that would allow her to outfit herself and William appropriately for ranch life. By midday, She had accomplished enough to feel satisfaction in her industry, yet the list of tasks remaining was long enough to provide structure for days to come. This balance, immediate results and future purpose, settled something in her that had been restless since Robert's death. Outside, she could hear William's excited voice mingling with Jackson's deeper tones from the direction of the barn. Following the sound, she discovered them in the corral where Willow, the pregnant mare, was pacing restlessly, her sides heaving with occasional contractions. "Is it happening?" she asked, leaning on the fence. Jackson nodded, his expression a mixture of concentration and anticipation. "Early stages. Could be hours yet, but she's definitely started." William stood pressed against the fence, eyes wide with wonder. "Mr. Blackwood says we shouldn't crowd her, but we need to watch in case she needs help." "That's right," Jackson confirmed. "Most times mares manage fine on their own, but first foals can be tricky." "Like human babies?" Abigail asked. "Similar." "Enough." Jackson's weathered face softened as he watched the mare. Living things coming into the world follow the same basic patterns, whether they have hooves or hands. The simple observation, delivered without sentimentality yet full of natural wisdom, struck Abigail as profoundly true. Jackson Blackwood was a man who understood life's fundamentals: birth, growth, death, and the cycle beginning again, without needing to dress them in philosophy or religion. "Will she be all right?" William's voice held genuine concern. "I believe so," Jackson answered, respecting the boy's question with adult seriousness. "Willow's strong and healthy. The sire is solid too, that big bay gelding you saw when we arrived. Can I stay and watch? I'll be quiet, I promise." Jackson considered this, then nodded. "You can help me fetch fresh water and clean straw when the time comes." A good horseman knows when to act and when to let nature take its course. The casual inclusion of William in the category of horseman brought a proud flush to the boys' cheeks. Abigail caught Jackson's eye over her son's head, silently communicating her gratitude. He acknowledged it with a slight nod before returning his attention to the mare. "I've made stew for midday meal," Abigail said. "It'll keep warm until you're ready." "Appreciate that," Jackson replied. "Might be a while yet." As she walked back to the house, Abigail found herself reflecting on the strange peace that had settled over her since arriving at Evergreen. Less than a week ago, she had been facing the prospect of forced servitude or worse. Now she moved freely through a well-built home, planning meals and repairs, watching her son's spirits revive under Jackson's quiet mentorship. Of course, threats still lingered on the horizon. Holloway and Wainwright weren't men to surrender their prey easily. But here, surrounded by mountains and miles from the nearest town, those dangers seemed less immediate, as if the very landscape provided a buffer between her family and those who meant them harm. Family. The words slipped into her thoughts unbidden. Was that what they were becoming? She, William, and this solitary rancher who had purchased her freedom. Not in the conventional sense, certainly, but perhaps in a more elemental way. People who had each lost their center of gravity, now cautiously orbiting each other, creating a new balance. The afternoon passed in productive rhythm, Abigail continuing her household assessment while periodically checking on William and Jackson in the corral. By the time shadows lengthened across the valley, Willow's labor had progressed significantly. The mare lay on her side, sides heaving with increasingly frequent contractions. "It won't be long now," Jackson told them as Abigail brought a fresh pot of coffee to the fence. "First sight of hooves should come soon." William refused to leave even for supper, so Abigail brought sandwiches to the corral, along with blankets against the evening chill. The three of them maintained a quiet vigil as stars began appearing overhead, pinpricks of silver in the deepening blue. When the foal finally emerged, first tiny hooves, then a velvety muzzle, and finally the entire gangly body sliding into the world, William's gasp of wonder spoke for all of them. The miracle of new life, with all its mess and struggle. And ultimate triumph unfolded before them in the golden light of lanterns Jackson had hung around the corral. "A filly," Jackson announced as the foal struggled to stand on impossibly long legs, Willow nickering encouragement. "Strong too, by the look of her." "She's beautiful," William breathed, his face transformed by joy. "Look at her legs, Mama, they're so long." "She'll grow into them," Jackson assured him, his own expression softer than Abigail had yet seen it. "What do you think we should call her?" William considered this responsibility with appropriate gravity. Something special, not just any name. "Take your time deciding," Jackson advised. "Watch her personality emerge. The right name will come." Later, after William had finally been persuaded to go to bed, his dreams surely filled with spindly-legged foals and future adventures, Abigail found Jackson still at the corral, watching mother and baby in the moonlight. "Thank you," she said, joining him at the fence, "for including him like that, for making him feel important." Jackson shrugged, the gesture dismissing any special merit in his actions. "Boy needs to feel useful. We all do." The simple truth of this observation resonated with Abigail. After Robert's death, she had thrown herself into work, any work, no matter how menial or poorly paid, not just for survival, but because action kept despair at bay. Perhaps Jackson, too, had found salvation in daily purpose after losing his family. "I found these," she said, offering a small bundle wrapped in cloth, "in the root cellar. I thought you might like them." Jackson unwrapped the package to reveal cigars, carefully preserved in a cedar box. His expression flickered with surprise, then recognition. "Eleanor's father sent these for special occasions," he explained. "I'd forgotten they were there. I thought, with the new foal, it might qualify as a special occasion." He studied the cigars for a moment, then rewrapped them carefully. "Perhaps, but not tonight. Some other milestone, maybe." Abigail understood. The birth of the foal, while joyful, was also painful, a reminder of new beginnings that his wife and son would never see. Celebration and grief often walked hand in hand, especially for those who had loved deeply. They stood in companionable silence, watching Willow nuzzle her foal with maternal devotion. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky in reckless abundance. "I never thanked you properly," Abigail said eventually, "for what you did in Bitter Creek, for the risk you took." Jackson's profile remained impassive. In the moonlight, "No thanks needed. Couldn't have done otherwise and still faced myself each morning. Still $500. It must have been nearly everything you had." "Money can be earned again," he replied simply. "Some things can't be replaced." The weight of this statement, from a man who had lost what was truly irreplaceable, silenced any further attempt at gratitude. Instead, Abigail found herself asking a different question. "Do you think they'll come, Holloway and his men?" Jackson didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Eventually. Men like that don't surrender what they consider theirs, regardless of legal transactions." "And when they do?" His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, but his voice carried absolute certainty. "They'll find I meant what I said about protecting what's mine." The possessive pronoun sent an unexpected warmth through Abigail. Not because she wished to be possessed, she'd had enough of being treated as property, but because Jackson's concept of ownership seemed to carry none of the dominance or exploitation that had characterized Wainwright's claims. Instead, it spoke of responsibility freely chosen, of protection offered without expectation of submission in return. "I should turn in," she said, suddenly aware of the intimacy created by darkness and shared confidences. "Tomorrow will bring its own work," Jackson nodded. "I'll stay a while longer." New mothers sometimes need reassurance their first night. As Abigail walked back to the house, she found herself wondering about the man she'd left standing in the moonlight. Jackson Blackwood presented himself as straightforward, uncomplicated, a rancher who lived by the basic codes of frontier life. Yet beneath that exterior lay depths of compassion and understanding that belied his rough appearance. A complex man, then, made more so by grief and solitude. A man who had extended protection to strangers at significant personal cost, yet asked nothing in return beyond honest work and respect for boundaries. A man who remembered his wife with reverent hands on a handmade quilt, yet welcomed new life with quiet joy. In her borrowed bedroom, beneath Eleanor's star quilt, Abigail found herself contemplating what the coming days might bring. Certainly, the ranch offered endless tasks for willing hands. Danger, potentially, if Holloway made good on his threats. But also, perhaps, healing for wounds that went deeper than physical deprivation or fear. Morning arrived with pale sunlight, filtering through frost-edged windows and the tantalizing aroma of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Abigail dressed quickly in one of Eleanor's simpler dresses, altered hastily the previous evening to accommodate her fuller figure. The fabric, good wool in a practical brown, felt luxurious after months of making do with increasingly threadbare garments. Downstairs, she found Jackson already at the kitchen table, a steaming mug before him and papers spread across the wooden surface. He looked up at her entrance, his expression shifting subtly as he took in her appearance in his late wife's clothing. "Good morning," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope you don't mind the dress." "No," he said quickly. "It suits you." Eleanor would have approved of practical solutions. The moment of awkwardness passed as Abigail busied herself at the stove, ladling oatmeal into bowls and slicing bread she'd found in the pantry. "William still asleep?" Jackson shook his head, already at the barn. Couldn't wait to see how the filly fared overnight. "He's never taken to something so quickly," she observed, setting a bowl before Jackson. "In Bitter Creek, he was always so cautious, so withdrawn." "Animals have a way of drawing out what's best in people," Jackson replied, folding his papers, which Abigail now recognized as property maps, and setting them aside. "Especially children. They don't judge or expect. They just respond honestly to how they're treated. Like their caretakers," Abigail noted with a smile. A corner of Jackson's mouth lifted in acknowledgement. "I've been thinking about what you said last night. About Holloway." The shift in topic sobered her immediately. "And we should be prepared. The ranch is remote, but not inaccessible. If Wainwright wants you badly enough, he'll send men, regardless of the season." "Why would he?" Abigail asked, the question that had troubled her since the confrontation on the mountain trail. "He has his money, more than I owed. Why pursue us further?" Jackson's expression hardened. "Men like Wainwright don't operate on simple economics. It's about power, control. You escaped his grasp. Others might get similar ideas if he doesn't make an example." The cold logic of this assessment sent a chill through Abigail, despite the warm kitchen. "What can we do? Be vigilant. Prepare the ranch for winter. We're already late in the season. I've neighbors about 5 miles west who'd lend assistance if needed, but deep snow could make that impossible. And if they come before the snow?" Jackson met her gaze directly. "Then we deal with them. I've weapons and know how to use them. The house itself is defensible, thick walls, clear sight lines. I built it with security in mind." Something in his tone suggested personal experience with such situations. Not just theoretical knowledge, but practical application. Another piece of the puzzle that was Jackson Blackwood. "I should teach you to shoot," he added, the statement matter of fact rather than questioning. "Both you and William when he's ready." Abigail nodded, accepting the necessity without flinching. Frontier life demanded practical skills for survival, regardless of conventional ideas about what was suitable for women or children. Robert had understood this, teaching her to hunt small game during their first lean winter in Montana. "I'm not unfamiliar with firearms," she told him, "though I could use practice with anything larger than a rabbit gun." Approval flickered in Jackson's eyes, not condescension or surprise, but simple recognition of her practical approach. Good, we'll start tomorrow. Today I need to repair that section of fence in the north pasture before it fails completely. Winter's coming faster than I'd like. They settled into the rhythm of the day, Jackson heading out to tend cattle and make repairs, Abigail continuing her assessment and organization of the house, William dividing his time between helping each of them and visiting the new foal, whom he had tentatively named Starlight for the white blaze shaped like a celestial explosion on her forehead. By evening, a comfortable routine had established itself: shared meals, divided chores, conversation that grew gradually more relaxed as they accustomed themselves to each other's presence. William chattered about the foal's progress. Jackson offered quiet observations about the cattle's condition or the likelihood of early snow, and Abigail found herself sharing anecdotes from her childhood in Missouri. Before her parents' deaths had set her on the path that eventually led to Bitter Creek, it was not yet a family. The wounds they each carried were too fresh, the bonds between them too new, but it contained the seeds of something that might grow into belonging, given time and nurturing. That night, as Abigail prepared for bed, she heard William's voice drifting through the partially open door of his room across the hall. Curious, she moved closer, realizing he was talking to Jackson, who must have come to check on him before. "Retiring. Do you think she'll let me ride her when she's bigger?" William was asking, presumably about Starlight. "With proper training, yes," came Jackson's measured response. "A good horseman builds trust first, though. That takes time and patience." "My pa was teaching me to be patient," William said, his voice taking on the wistful quality it always did when he spoke of Robert. "He said rushing good work only makes bad work happen faster." "Your father was a wise man," Jackson replied, the simple affirmation carrying more weight than elaborate praise. A pause, then William's voice again. "Hesitant now. Do you think he'd mind? That we're here with you instead of with him?" Abigail's breath caught at the innocent directness of the question. She found herself frozen in the hallway, waiting for Jackson's response. "I think," Jackson said slowly, choosing his words with evident care, "that fathers want their children safe and happy above all else. If he was the man your mother describes, he'd be grateful you have a secure place, no matter who provided it." "That's what Mama says too," William confirmed. "But sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm asleep." The observation, delivered with a child's unvarnished honesty, pierced Abigail's heart. She had tried so hard to shield William from her grief, to present a brave face despite their circumstances. Yet children perceive far more than adults often. "Credited. Loss leaves marks that take time to fade," Jackson said, his voice gentle but not condescending. "Your mother is stronger than most, carrying both her sorrow and her concern for you. But even the strongest need moments to acknowledge what they've lost. Like you do? With Mrs. Blackwood and your boy?" A longer pause this time. When Jackson spoke again, his voice carried a depth of emotion Abigail hadn't heard before. "Yes, like I do. Does it ever stop hurting?" "Not completely," Jackson admitted. "But it changes. Becomes something you can carry without it crushing you. And eventually, you find you can remember the good parts without the pain overwhelming them." The wisdom in this response, honest yet hopeful, acknowledging reality while offering perspective, brought tears to Abigail's eyes. Jackson Blackwood might claim to be a simple rancher, but he possessed an emotional intelligence that many more educated men lacked entirely. "I'm glad we came here," William said, his voice heavy with approaching sleep. "Even if those bad men come looking for us. If they do, they'll find more than they bargained for," Jackson assured him, his tone shifting to one of quiet determination. "Now get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Abigail retreated silently to her room before Jackson emerged, not wanting him to know she'd overheard this private exchange. But as she slipped beneath Eleanor's star quilt, She found herself echoing her son's sentiment. She, too, was glad they had come to Evergreen Ranch with its solid walls and straightforward routines, its pregnant marais and mending fences, its mountain vistas, and most importantly, its solitary caretaker whose gruff exterior concealed a heart capable of remarkable gentleness. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around the ranch house like a protective embrace, stars blazing in the clear mountain air, while inside, 3 damaged people began the delicate work of building something new from the fragments of what had been lost. The first snowfall came to Evergreen Ranch 6 weeks after Abigail and William's arrival, transforming the landscape overnight into a pristine wonderland of white. Abigail stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warming her hands, watching as dawn illuminated the snow-covered mountains with a rose-gold glow that took her breath away. The beauty of it, so different from the gray slush that had filled Bitter Creek's muddy streets, seemed almost unreal, like something from a storybook rather than her actual life. "First real snow," Jackson observed, entering the kitchen. "With an armload of firewood, earlier than last year. Might be a hard winter ahead." In the week since their arrival, Abigail had learned to read the subtle changes in Jackson's demeanor. The slight softening around his eyes when William made him laugh, the tightening of his jaw when memories caught him unawares, the quiet satisfaction that settled over him after a day of productive work. This morning, she noted a watchfulness in his gaze as he studied the snow-covered landscape beyond the window. "Will it cause problems?" she asked, already mentally cataloging their food stores and winter preparations. "Not if we're ready for it." He stacked the wood neatly beside the kitchen stove. "Might want to bake extra today. I need to check the north pasture fence one more time. Make sure the cattle have access to the sheltered areas." Their conversation had acquired this practical rhythm, information exchanged, tasks allocated, decisions made with minimum fuss. It suited them both, this uncluttered communication that respected each other's intelligence and autonomy. "I'll make cinnamon rolls," she decided, "and that venison stew William likes. It'll keep warm until you return." Something flickered across Jackson's face, appreciation, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement of the domestic harmony they had established. That would be welcome. As he headed back outside, Abigail found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. The house that had greeted her with dusty surfaces and neglected corners now gleamed with renewed care. The pantry bulged with preserved vegetables, fruits, and meats, some from Eleanor's stores, others processed by Abigail's own hands over the past weeks. The kitchen garden had been cleared of weeds and prepared for spring planting, the chicken coop repaired, and restocked with a half-dozen hens purchased from a neighboring ranch. More significant than these physical improvements was the transformation in William. The withdrawn, fearful boy who had clung to her skirts in Bitter Creek had blossomed into an enthusiastic helper, who rose before dawn to assist with chores, who trailed Jackson like a shadow, absorbing every detail of ranch operations, who chattered about Starlight's daily growth with the passion of a born horseman. And Jackson himself, the solitary, grief-hardened man who had purchased her contract, had gradually revealed layers of complexity beneath his stoic exterior. He approached each task with methodical thoroughness, whether mending fences or teaching. William to whittle, yet his patience seemed inexhaustible. He spoke rarely but listened intently, especially to William's endless questions. Most revealing were the books he read in the evenings by lamplight, not just practical manuals on animal husbandry or agriculture, but poetry, history, even philosophy gleaned from Eleanor's carefully curated library. A man of unexpected depths, then. A man who had honored every promise made that night in Bitter Creek, asking nothing beyond what had been agreed upon. A man who had created space for her and William to heal without intruding on their grief or imposing his own. William burst into the kitchen, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. Mr. Blackwood says I can help him check the cattle today. In the snow, did he now? Abigail smiled, reaching for the flour canister. Then you'll need a proper breakfast before you go, and your warmest clothes. He's already saddling the horses, William reported, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy. He says I've earned the right to ride Thunder. Thunder was Jackson's most reliable gelding, gentle enough for a beginner but steady in difficult conditions. That he would trust William with such a valuable animal spoke volumes about the boy's progress under his tutelage. Well then, Abigail said, cracking eggs into a bowl, we'd better not keep them waiting. She prepared a hearty breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey, watching with maternal satisfaction as William devoured 3 helpings. Jackson ate with equal appetite, though more restraint, occasionally reminding William about proper trail behavior or what to watch for among the cattle. Your mother's coming too, he said, reaching for his coffee. If she's of a mind to. Everyone should know how to navigate the ranch in all seasons. The invitation, for that's what it was, despite its practical framing, caught Abigail by surprise. Though she had learned to shoot as promised and helped with various outdoor tasks, she had primarily focused on the house and immediate surroundings, leaving the wider ranch operations to Jackson and, increasingly, William. I'd like that, she said, meeting his gaze across the table. Thank you. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement perhaps that their arrangement had evolved beyond its original parameters. They were no longer simply employer and employee, benefactor and recipient. They had become something more complex, partners in the shared enterprise of survival, co-architects of a household rebuilt from grief's rubble. An hour later, the 3 of them rode across the snow-covered pastures, their breath-forming clouds. In the crisp air, Abigail, mounted on a placid mare named Daisy, found herself marveling at the transformed landscape. Mountains that had become familiar over the past weeks now appeared majestic in their winter mantles, the forest edge a study in contrasts between dark pines and snow-laden branches. Jackson led them on a methodical circuit of the property, checking fences, water sources, and the scattered herds with a rancher's practiced eye. He pointed out landmarks, a lightning-struck tree that marked the western boundary, a rock formation resembling a bear's profile, a sheltered hollow where cattle instinctively gathered during storms. Need to know these things, he explained, when Abigail commented on his thorough narration. In case you ever need to find your way alone. The implication that circumstances might arise requiring her to navigate without him sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. Despite the peace of recent weeks, the threat from Bitter Creek remained a shadow at the edges of their new life, acknowledged in increased vigilance and regular rifle practice, but rarely discussed directly. Do you think they've forgotten about U.S.? William asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. Despite his excitement about the snow and the ride, he remained acutely aware of the dangers that had driven them to Evergreen. Jackson considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Not forgotten, but winter changes priorities. Bitter Creek will be focused on survival now, same as everyone in these mountains. But when spring comes, William persisted. When spring comes, we'll be ready. Jackson's tone conveyed absolute certainty, but that's months away yet. For now, we have more immediate concerns. He directed their attention to a section of fence partially collapsed under the weight of drifted snow. The next hour was spent in practical labor, clearing the snow, repositioning posts, restringing wire. William worked alongside Jackson with the focus of an apprentice determined to master essential skills, while Abigail held tools and handed them as needed, observing the easy rhythm that had developed between man and boy. By the time they returned to the ranch house, afternoon shadows were lengthening across the snow. The promised cinnamon rolls had risen in their absence, filling the kitchen with a spiced fragrance that welcomed them home from the cold. As they shed damp coats and boots, In the mudroom, stamping feeling back into chilled feet, Abigail felt a surge of contentment so profound it momentarily startled her. This wasn't happiness exactly. The grief for Robert remained too fresh for that, but something adjacent to it. Purpose, perhaps. Belonging. The sense that she and William had found their proper place in the world's order, however unexpectedly. Later, after supper had been eaten and cleared away, they gathered in the main room where Jackson had built a fire that cast dancing shadows on the log walls. William sat cross-legged on the hearthrug, whittling a piece of pine under Jackson's occasional guidance. Abigail occupied Eleanor's rocking chair, mending one of Jackson's shirts, the domestic task oddly satisfying after the day's outdoor exertions. "Mr. Blackwood," William said without looking up from his carving, "was your boy good at whittling too?" The question hung in the air, its innocent directness momentarily freezing both adults. Jackson had spoken of Thomas occasionally, usually in passing reference, but William had never asked about him so directly. "He was learning," Jackson said finally, his hands continuing their steady work on his own carving, what appeared to be a small horse, perhaps intended as a gift for William. Had good hands for detail work, patient like his mother. "How old was he?" William continued, apparently unaware of the conversation's emotional weight. "5 when he died. Would be 8 now, same as you." William absorbed this information with a child's matter-of-fact acceptance of life's harshest realities. "Do you think we would have been friends?" Jackson's hands stilled. When he spoke, his voice carried a roughness Abigail hadn't heard before. "I believe you would. He always wanted a brother." William nodded solemnly. "I did too. Pa said maybe someday, but then—" He left the sentence unfinished, returning to his whittling with renewed concentration. Abigail's fingers trembled slightly as she continued her mending, touched by the simple exchange that contained so much unspoken emotion. Jackson caught her eye across the room, something vulnerable and raw in his expression before he mastered it, returning to his carving with deliberate focus. "I'm thinking of making cheese tomorrow," she said, intentionally shifting to practical matters. "The neighbors left more milk than we can drink when they visited last week." "Good idea, Jackson," responded, following her lead. "Root cellar stays cool enough to age it properly, even in summer." The conversation returned to safe territory, winter projects, spring planning, tomorrow's tasks, but something had shifted between them, some barrier thinned by William's innocent questions and Jackson's honest answers. Later, after William had been tucked into bed with a story about his father that Abigail made a point of telling each night, keeping Robert's memory alive through deliberate recollection, she returned to the main room to find Jackson still by the fire, staring into the flames with the distant expression that sometimes claimed him in quiet moments. "I'm sorry about William's questions," she said, remaining by the doorway. "Children don't always understand what hurts to discuss." Jackson shook his head slightly. "No need for apologies. Questions are how boys make sense of the world." Thomas was the same, always asking why, how, when. A pause then. "It's good to speak of him. Keeps him real." Abigail moved closer, settling into Eleanor's chair again. "Tell me about him?" "If you'd like to." For a moment, she thought he might decline, retreat behind the reserve that had been his primary defense when they first met. Instead, he began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing ease about the son he had lost. The boy who had collected interesting rocks and named each horse on the ranch, who had laughed with his whole body and asked for the same story every night for a month, who had his mother's eyes and his father's determined chin. As he spoke, Jackson's face transformed, grief giving way to the bittersweet joy of remembrance. He smiled, recounting Thomas's first ride on a horse, chuckled describing the boy's failed attempt to adopt a wild rabbit as a pet, grew thoughtful, recalling how the child had comforted a dying calf through its final hours. "He had a gentle heart," Jackson concluded. Like his mother. Like your William. And like his father, Abigail said quietly. Jackson looked up, startled by the assessment. I'm not. He began, then stopped. Most wouldn't describe me that way. Most don't see you teaching a boy to whittle with endless patience, she countered. Or bottle-feeding orphaned calves at midnight. Or speaking to horses in that voice you use when you think no one's listening. A flush crept up Jackson's neck, visible even in the firelight. Ranching requires attention to detail, he said gruffly. Nothing special about that. There are many ways to attend to details, Abigail observed. Not all involve gentleness. He had no response to this, returning his gaze to the fire as if seeking answers in its depths. Outside, the wind had risen, carrying the muffled whisper of snow against the windows. The storm Jackson had predicted was arriving, wrapping the ranch in white isolation. Storms setting in, he noted, changing the subject. Might last a few days from the feel of it. Abigail accepted the conversational shift, recognizing that Jackson had shared more of himself tonight than perhaps he had intended. We're well prepared, she assured him. Food, firewood, warm clothing, we want for nothing essential. No, he agreed, his gaze lifting to meet hers. We don't. Something in his tone, in the steady way he held her gaze, suggested he was acknowledging more than just their physical preparations for winter. Before she could respond, however, a sound outside interrupted the moment, the distant but unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. Jackson was on his feet instantly, moving to extinguish the lamps while Abigail, heart suddenly pounding, hurried to check on William. The boy slept peacefully, unaware of the potential threat. She closed his door quietly and returned to find Jackson by the front window, rifle in hand, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. Could be nothing, he said in a low voice as she approached. Hunter, neighbor. But we can't assume that, she finished for him, her mind racing through the defensive plans they had discussed, but never expected to implement so soon, with winter's arrival seeming to promise at least temporary security. Another shot echoed, closer this time, followed by the faint sound of men's voices carried on the wind. Get William, Jackson said, his voice calm but brooking no argument. Bring him to the root cellar. There's a hidden space behind the north wall. Eleanor insisted on it when we built the place. Rifles loaded and waiting there. Abigail nodded, practical despite her fear. And you? I'll meet them before they reach the house. Better to control the encounter than wait for them to set the terms. She wanted to argue, to insist he take shelter with them, but the strategic logic was sound. Whoever was approaching, whether Holloway's men or simple travelers seeking refuge from the storm, would be better handled in the open, away from where William slept. Be careful, she said instead, touching his arm briefly before hurrying to wake her son. William, groggy but immediately alert when she explained the situation, followed her instructions without question, gathering his warmest clothes and boots. While she collected blankets and the small bag of emergency supplies Jackson had prepared weeks earlier. Together, they made their way to the root cellar, where Jackson had indeed created a concealed space behind shelves of preserved food, large enough for 2 people to hide comfortably, with a small air vent disguised as part of the foundation. Stonework. Remember what Mr. Blackwood taught you, she whispered as they settled into the hidden compartment. Absolute silence until we know it's safe. William nodded, his small face solemn in the dim light of this single candle she'd brought. Despite his fear, evident in the tight grip he maintained on her hand, he showed none of the panic that might be expected from a child his age. Instead, he watched the root cellar door with the focused intensity he'd learned from Jackson during their shooting lessons, the loaded rifle positioned where Abigail could reach it instantly if needed. Above them, the main house creaked and settled in the winter wind, the familiar sounds now ominous with the knowledge that danger approached. Abigail strained to hear what might be happening outside, but the thick walls muffled all but the loudest. Noises. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the waiting almost worse than direct confrontation would have been. William's breathing had steadied into the regular rhythm of sleep, his head heavy against her shoulder, when the root cellar door finally opened. Abigail reached for the rifle, positioning herself between the entrance and her son, when Jackson's voice came softly through the darkness. "It's me. You can come out now." Relief flooded through her as she pushed open the hidden panel, emerging into the root cellar proper where Jackson stood, his rifle still in hand but his posture relaxed. "Who was it?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid waking William, who stirred but didn't wake as she lifted him. "Harris from the Double Circle Ranch 5 miles west," Jackson explained, helping her navigate the cellar steps with her sleeping burden. "Tracking a mountain lion that's been taking their calves. Shot fired was in missing his mark in the snowfall. Not Holloway?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "No, though Harris had news about Bitter Creek. Apparently there's been trouble there since we left. Wainwright's lost his grip on the town. Miners formed some kind of cooperative, refused to honor his contracts. Things turned violent." This unexpected development momentarily stunned Abigail. "What kind of violence?" "The kind that ends with Wainwright leaving town permanently," Jackson said grimly as they reached William's bedroom. Harris didn't have details, just rumors. But he'd heard Wainwright fled west toward Idaho Territory, and Holloway with him. Abigail settled William into his bed, tucking the quilts around his sleeping form, before following Jackson back to the main room where he was rebuilding the fire. "Do you believe it?" she asked, sinking into Eleanor's chair, suddenly exhausted from the surge and ebb of fear. Jackson considered the question carefully, stoking the flames before answering. "Possible. Mining towns can turn quickly when fortunes change. If enough men decided Wainwright was bleeding them dry, then we might truly be safe," Abigail finished, the possibility almost too precious to voice aloud. "Perhaps." Jackson's cautious response suggested he wasn't ready to embrace complete security yet. "I'll ride to town when the storm passes, confirm what Harris heard. But for tonight, at least we can rest easy." The fire had rekindled, its warmth gradually reclaiming the room from the chill that had settled during their absence. Outside, snow continued to fall, insulating the ranch house in pristine white, while the wind sang around the eaves like a lonely spirit seeking entrance. "You should sleep," Jackson said, noticing Abigail's drooping eyelids. "Been a long day." She nodded, rising from the chair, but paused before leaving the room. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For being the kind of man who builds hidden rooms and teaches boys to whittle and protects what's his." His expression softened in the firelight, revealing for a moment the man beneath the weathered exterior, not just the capable rancher or reluctant rescuer, but the father who had loved a son, the husband who had cherished a wife, the human being who had suffered profound loss yet retained the capacity for compassion. "Get some rest, Mrs. Foster," he said, his voice gentle. "Tomorrow brings its own work." It was the practical response she had come to expect from him, yet something in his eyes suggested words unspoken, possibilities hovering just beyond articulation. As Abigail climbed the stairs to her borrowed bedroom, she found herself contemplating the strange journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperate widow to auctioned property to whatever she was becoming now in this mountain sanctuary with its taciturn guardian and hidden strengths. Snow continued to fall through the night, transforming Evergreen Ranch into an island of warmth amid a sea of white. By morning, drifts had piled against the barn and outbuildings, smoothing the landscape's contours into gentle curves that disguised the rugged terrain beneath. Abigail woke to find William already at the window, nose pressed against the glass as he surveyed the winter wonderland. "It's higher than my head in some places, Mama," he exclaimed. "Mr. Blackwood says we're properly snowed in now." Indeed. Jackson had already cleared paths to the essential outbuildings and brought in fresh, milk from the cow they kept near the house during winter. The promised venison stew had been set to simmer, filling the kitchen with savory aromas that seemed to defy the Arctic landscape beyond the windows. "First real blizzard of the season," Jackson announced when Abigail appeared in the kitchen. "Might be stuck here for a few days until it clears enough to break trail to town." The prospect of extended isolation, far from causing anxiety, brought a sense of security. Snowbound in this solid house with ample provisions, they were about as safe from Holloway and his ilk as they could possibly be. The day unfolded in peaceful productivity, Jackson and William tending to the animals in the barn while Abigail tackled indoor projects that had awaited attention. The cheese-making she had mentioned proceeded smoothly, filling the kitchen with the distinctive aroma of curds separating from whey. Bread dough rose by the stove, promising fresh loaves by supper time. Eleanor's sewing machine, a treasured possession that had been transported by wagon all the way from Helena, was finally cleared of dust and oiled back to functionality, ready for the mending and creating that winter months would allow time for. By afternoon, the storm had intensified again, wind driving snow horizontally past the windows with hypnotic fury. Jackson built up the fires in both the kitchen and main room, creating islands of warmth against nature's assault. William, having exhausted himself helping with the morning chores, napped on the hearthrug, surrounded by the wooden animals Jackson had carved for him over recent weeks. "He's truly at home here," Abigail observed, watching her son's peaceful slumber. "I've never seen him so settled." Jackson, mending harness leather nearby, nodded without looking up from his work. "Ranch life suits some spirits better than town living. Room to breathe, purpose in each day's work." "It suits you," she noted. "I can't imagine you confined to a city." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Tried it once, after the war. Lasted 3 months in St. Louis before the building started closing in on me. Needed sky overhead, not smoke and brick." This casual reference to his past intrigued Abigail. Despite weeks of living under the same roof, sharing meals and work and occasional evening conversations, Jackson rarely spoke of his life before Evergreen. "You fought in the war?" she asked, keeping her tone conversational as she continued her mending. "Union Cavalry, Missouri Regiment." His hands remained steady on the leather. "Saw things no man should see." "Did things no man should have to do." Came west afterward looking for clean air and honest work. The simple summary contained volumes of unspoken experience, the horrors of battle, the moral compromises of war, the search for redemption or at least peace in the aftermath. Abigail had known other veterans in Bitter Creek, had seen how some drowned their memories in whiskey, while others built new lives with deliberate focus, as if proper attention to present details could offset the chaos of the past. Jackson clearly belonged to the latter category. His methodical approach to ranching, his emphasis on preparation and self-sufficiency, his careful stewardship of the land, all spoke of a man determined to create order from disorder, to build rather than destroy. "That's where you met Eleanor?" she prompted gently. "Helena, yes. She was teaching at the territorial school. I was delivering beef for a reception at the governor's house." A genuine smile now, memory softening his features. "She corrected my grammar while I was unloading a side of beef. Said if I was going to curse, I should at least do it with proper sentence structure." Abigail laughed, surprised by this glimpse of Eleanor's spirited personality. "She sounds formidable." "She was," Jackson agreed, his expression warm with remembrance. "Educated, cultured, could have had her pick of proper gentlemen. Instead she chose a rough-edged rancher with more scars than prospects." "She saw what mattered," Abigail observed quietly. "The man beneath the surface." Jackson's hands stilled on the harness. He looked up, meeting her gaze directly across the room. "As you did with your Robert?" "Yes," she said simply. "He wasn't what my family expected either. Too common in his speech, too calloused in his hands. But he had a beautiful heart, gentle with weakness, firm against cruelty. The kind of man who'd share his last crust with a stranger. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the shared understanding of having loved deeply creating a bridge between their separate losses. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, but within the ranch house, something warmer than physical comfort had established itself, the tentative recognition of kindred spirits, who had each survived profound grief without surrendering to bitterness. "Spring will come," Jackson said eventually, returning to his mending. "Always does, no matter how deep the snow or long the winter." Abigail understood he wasn't speaking merely of seasons. "Yes," she agreed, watching William sleep peacefully in the heart of this home they were gradually making their own. "It always does." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.